Hello everyone, and welcome to the Henchman's Memoirs. This is our campaign diary of our 5e Dark Souls of Drakkenheim campaign. When we last left off, we unfortunately had to stop our session in the middle of a combat as the party was squared off against a group of Gamir gnolls that are attacking the smithy on the Scar. Our good friend Dirt Nap Pete was taking one of his dirt naps. Over here, Thaddeus, the gnome druid, had turned himself into a giant constrictor snake, and they were, along with Atticus, the artificer, they were fighting this gnoll. They had put a pretty good hurt on him so far, but this gnoll had managed to sneak up against their sorcerer, and it's bad news when that happens, because these are those MCDM Flea Mortals gnolls, and they were punching above their weight. These things were doing some serious damage. So these guys are trying to finish him off. When he goes down, this gnoll over here gets an ability. They get to move and make an attack anytime an ally they can see goes down. Just one more thing that makes these things really tough. So he uses his reaction to drop Nexel. Nexel hits the ground, and Atticus and Thaddeus are trying to figure out what they want to do. He doesn't want to lose concentration on this Minotaur over here, which he has turned into a tiny little centipede using polymorph. He knows this guy's going to be bad news. They're already hurting enough. So he decides to turn back into a gnome so he could move away a little bit and cast Healing Word. But something important happened with Nexel while he was down. So when Nexel got down to 0 hit points, he had another vision of his reason for being in Drakkenheim in the first place. He has received these apocalyptic visions, and this woman featured in each one of them, that he found out her name is Sylvia. And she's been kind of guiding him. She's the one who told him he needs to get the artifact, or the relics of St. Vitruvio, and awaken Argonath, or that Argonath is the key to the future of the city. So he had this vision, and I based it on, if you've played, I think it was Diablo 3 or Diablo 2. Anyway, there's an awesome cutscene where Tyrael is thrown out of heaven in that game, right? So I told the players to watch that cutscene from that Diablo game and basically replace Tyrael with Sylvia. Right? She was this angelic figure, and she was being confronted by Empyrean, and he's like, you have betrayed the Jedi Order. He's like, you've gone against everything that we stand for. You've gone against the Council of the High Heavens. And she says, no, I'm serving the greater will, and the greater will is that we help the mortals save Drakkenheim. And Empyrean is like, no, you know, who are you to declare what the will of the high heaven declare what the greater will is and go against the Council of the High Heavens? And basically she's like, if you're unwilling and unable to act and do what is best, then I will renounce my fellowship with you. And she starts tearing off her armor, and Empyrean's like, sacrilege. And as she tears off her armor, she gets pulled through the floor of this chamber in the high heavens where this vision is taking place. And then Nexel sees her like plummeting towards the destroyed city of Drakkenheim, you know, as this fiery comet. You know, right then, Nexel was trying to, I think he wanted to cast a spell, but he didn't. All of his healing spells required concentration or something like that. So he ended up just running over here and pouring a potion in his mouth. And I think Atticus, and maybe once Nexel was up, he moved away and blasted him, and they finished off this last gnoll, right? So then they yell up to the smithy on the Scar, and in the smithy right now are 3 of the 4 dwarves Iron Helm siblings that are in charge of this smithy. Mordecai, Reginald, and Eloise are up there. Gertrude, who they've dealt with before, is away from the smithy, probably outside the city, getting her, being able to complete a long rest. And I have to say, I made up these NPC cards for this, and I'm going to make a video soon about why NPC cards are so important for your campaign prep. But I have to say, of all the pluses and minuses I've mentioned when it comes to the Dungeons of Drakkenheim campaign, naming the 4 main dwarven characters, Gertrude, Eloise, Reginald, and Mordecai, those just don't sound like fantasy names, okay? I don't know where they made Iron Helm, okay, that's kind of a classic dwarf kind of name, but these first names, I don't know where they came up with these instead of giving them more fantasy sounding names. But anyway, Mordecai is kind of, he has assassin stats, and he was one of the main people who'd been firing muskets down there to try to help them. And of course, all of my dwarves talk like this. Even the ladies, they all talk with this sort of a deep, closest I can come to a Scottish accent voice. And they're like, "Oh, it's about time you got here, you know." And they're like, "Hey, have you got any healing? You know, we're kind of hurting." It's like, "Oh, we had plenty of healing about 2.5 hours ago when we sent for you. It seems like you didn't press yourself to get here." Well, anyway, the party gets up to the walls and everything, but they still have to make a decision about this guy, right? He got turned into a little centipede, but they had lost track of him, and the party's like, "Oh, what are we going to do with him? Maybe Nexel could turn into a hawk and carry him, far away or something." I'm like, "Guys, you can't find him." So after that kind of sunk in, they were like, "Okay, all right. Let's get into the smithy, right?" And I know Nexel and Thaddeus were actually inside on the walls of the smithy, right? And Atticus was out here, and Pietor decided to stay outside the walls also, even though he had like 6 hit points or something. They had basically just barely gotten him up. So Nexel drops concentration. This guy appears. They've all got their ready to action. All the dwarves shoot at him, but I'm only letting the named dwarves actually make attack rolls. They're not doing very much damage to him. He appeared more or less in the space where he had disappeared from. And Thaddeus casts Erupting Earth, which is going to give him reduced movement. This has worked great for him when they were fighting the flesh golem at Schloss Mordenheim, right? So he's like, "Okay, we've got this. We can take on one big bruiser," right? And I think Nexel, of course, let loose a fireball as soon as this guy appears. But he's got some hit points and he's got some movement because, again, I'm using the stats from this fan-made Witcher book, which I have to once again mention. The Book of Beautiful Horrors is just a great fan-made. It's just a great fan-made product, and you can see here their Patreon page. The credit goes to Nathan Halse for the design on this, but so this is the stats I'm using for a Gore Bull. He's CR7. That might seem like a lot since the party is level 7 and there were all these gnolls before, but again, I used the rules from Matt Colville. I trusted him. I used the CR budget that he suggested, and they said he said through his book that this was going to be a fair encounter, even though the party was like, "There's no way we could have fought this Gore Bull and all those gnolls at the same time." So anyway, sorry for that short rant. So Nexel drops the spell and lets this guy turns back into a minotaur, and he comes charging out. Even though Nexel used Erupting Earth, the Gorbull has this ability, Primal Fury. His move's already 40, and then he gets to double it when he basically Barbarian Rages. So he charges right out of that area. This triggers Dirtnat Peeps' delayed action, which was just to run up to him, because he was thinking, oh, I'll spend a key point on my turn, I'll do a flurry of blows, and then I can move away without drawing an attack of opportunity. But all he actually readied was running up to him. So he gets up there, this thing has this charge ability, and it knocks him down to 0, and when it does, it has this very cool ability called Banquet of Flesh, where when he drops you to 0, he can lean down as a bonus action and take a bite out of you, doing an additional 3d8 damage and healing himself for the same amount. So this gave Peter some failed death saves, but basically I did the thing where the camera cuts away as he leans down to take a bite out of him, because I was like, you can describe where the bite comes from, and his player wasn't willing to do it, so the camera cuts away to all the dwarves and Thaddeus and Nexel up here, and they all kind of cringe, and they kind of, cover their eyes and cover their mouths and stuff, and then the camera comes back and he's just standing up with this chunk of raw meat in his mouth. So anyway, he decides now he's done enough damage. He runs over here and gets into it with Atticus. And Atticus was doing reasonably well against him. They're dropping some spells. And then I think Thaddeus, he doesn't have all the best healing spells, but he had this spell that creates like a healing spirit that heals you a little bit each round you're standing in. So he did that. Dirtnat Pete jumps up and runs over to get back into this fight. And old Nexel was like, well, I hate to see that healing go to waste. I could use a little healing. Maybe I could clamber down this wall. I was like, well, it's not going to be easy. You're up on the wall of the smithy. You're like 10 feet up. So he rolls an acrobatics check. He rolled like a 1. He falls, takes more damage, is almost down to 0 hit points, and he's like crawling over to get into the healing circle when Thaddeus' player's like, oh, I could have moved that over to you, man. I can move it like 30 feet as a bonus action. And everybody at the table just kind of groaned and slapped their forehead. But eventually they did manage to finish off the Minotaur. They get back inside the smithy. They're talking to the dwarves. There was a brief role-playing situation where Thaddeus was trying to make some kind of joke about Mordecai's sister, and dwarves don't have a sense of humor about your sister jokes. And so there was a duel, there were harsh words, but eventually, even though they managed to wring an apology out of Nexel, and they agreed as long as they never brought Nexel into the smithy on the Scar or the dwarves' camp outside of town, that things would be more or less forgiven as far as that goes. So they had some trade with the dwarves. They showed the dwarves some of the plans that they had gotten, and they moved on. The next step for them, actually, as they were leaving town, they ran into the Rat Queens again. So the Rat Queens, as opposed to being the rival adventuring party, I've introduced them as kind of the lower than the PC's level adventuring party, who they also are starting to hear about, just to keep the thing going that Drakkenheim is a destination for adventurers of every stripe. And so the Rat Queens, again, if you haven't checked out the Rat Queens comic book, you're really missing out. This is a good series of graphic novels. But the Rat Queens, they've got their female cleric down here, they've got their dwarven warrior woman, they've got their halfling rogue, and then this girl is kind of a half-elf tiefling kind of thing, I think, and she's their sorceress. So the party encountered them and was able to talk to them for a few minutes. They were going into the city as the party was going out, and they talked a little bit about their missions and stuff, but I just want to keep introducing them as a future element of the story. So the party made it out of the haze, and I think they went back to Emberwood Village, where they didn't have any current sort of plot threads that needed to be addressed. So they took a long rest in Emberwood Village, and then they started talking about where they're going to go next. And so as we finished up, they were talking about heading back into the city. They have a lot of different open plot threads hanging right now, and they basically need to get back into the city and start following up on some of these. Eventually, we're working our way towards the big fight over St. Vitruvio's Cathedral, but there might be a couple things they need to take care of before that. Hey, we would appreciate a subscribe. We love it when you guys give us a like, and especially when you guys give us a comment. We're coming up on another big marathon session where we will be playing for several hours, so that'll give me content for more of these videos. If you want to hear what happens, subscribe, and we'll catch you next time on the Henchman's Memoirs.